Update to their terms of service, thanks to Europe. All right. Yeah, thank you. Now I gave this great introduction, Scott, and I missed half of it, but I'm so glad we didn't miss the main message, right? So yeah, that's great. So again, okay, this lady yesterday at the garage sale, and she asked me, so what do you teach, right? So I was like, I mean, that's kind of a loaded question. And so I was like, well, I'll just tell her what I'm preaching on. And so I said, okay, you know how in the scriptures, after Jesus' resurrection, there's this story of these two guys that are walking down the road, the road to Emmaus. And these two guys, as they were walking, they were talking about all the incredible events that had just happened. Like, whoa, this guy, like, he was on the cross, and then he's resurrected, and then they're not finding his body, and like all this kind of stuff, and they're just like blown away by it. Well, then Jesus himself comes up and starts walking with them, but they didn't recognize him. Right? They didn't recognize Jesus. I don't know, maybe they didn't know Jesus personally, or maybe they knew him kind of from a distance, or maybe he was transfigured in some way. I don't know. Whatever it was, they didn't recognize him. Maybe he even just kind of was hiding himself, in a sense, from them. And he begins talking to them, and he says this to them. This is Luke 24, verse 25. He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken." Okay, now the prophets are all what we would call the Old Testament prophets, right? Isaiah, Jeremiah, all those guys. He's like, you guys have heard everything that they've said. Moses was, probably the greatest prophet. And then he says, did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And here's the kicker. He says to them, verse 27, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. What? Okay, that just blows me away, First of all, I was thinking, man, this had to be a long conversation, right? Like, he started in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I mean, we've been doing this, and we've been doing it over a period of weeks' time, right? He did it in one walk with them. I hope the road to Emmaus was a long road, and that they had plenty of time for conversation. If I had one moment in history that I could be a part of, I think that this might be one of those moments that I would like to experience, is, wow, walking with Jesus, and then all of a sudden realizing that it is Jesus and that he's just schooled us in what God was all about, all this time. So we're going through this, right? And now we're in the final book of the books of Moses. So those books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and then last but not least, Deuteronomy. All right? And here's why I say last but not least, okay, for a few reasons. First, some people have called this book the heart of the Old Testament because it's very much this pivotal book, okay? In this story of the people of Israel. And then now, this is kind of that crossroads where they're just about ready to enter into the promised land. So this is kind of like the final moments are in the book of Deuteronomy before they cross over. Okay, so it's really significant there. It's a pivot point. Second, it's one of the books that is most quoted in the New Testament. Okay, now the Psalms are the most quoted, right? Like everybody loves the Psalms. Everybody quotes the Psalms. The second most quoted in the Old Testament or the New Testament is the book of Isaiah, which obviously has a lot of prophet potential there, right? And then the third book, though, is Deuteronomy. And you know what is even maybe more significant is it is the second most quoted book by Jesus himself. He used a lot of scriptures from Deuteronomy. Now, you might think that second place isn't really that big of a deal, right? My wife makes fun of me because there was this one time I found out the second biggest cottonwood tree in the state of South Dakota was in Sioux Falls. And so I got really excited to find the second biggest cottonwood tree and say, oh, Emily's like, no, that was me that was making fun of you. Okay. It was Emily that was making fun of me then. So glad you wanted me to highlight that. No. It's in the Arboretum somewhere. So I had to go track it down. I wanted to see it. I actually went very close to the first biggest cottonwood. But so to me, second place is like, it's okay. It's a big deal, right? But in this case, it's because Jesus used Deuteronomy in a lot of his teachings. I mean, if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, you're going to find Deuteronomy verses. Like he's quoting that stuff. It's important. The other thing is, the other time where he quoted Deuteronomy was when he was in the wilderness being accused by the accuser, by Satan himself. Guess what he quoted? He quoted Deuteronomy. All right? So I think if Jesus said it, it's probably an important book of the Bible. Okay? That's just my take on it. Yesterday, somebody asked me if I was ready to have Emily leave the nest. And she is going to school in the fall. She's going all the way across the state. And her dad is, having a little bit of an adjustment to that still, And I was thinking about it. When your child is getting ready to leave the nest, I'm sure you guys have been through this, like all of a sudden you start going through a lot in your heart and in your mind, okay? And so one of the things is, I'm like, okay, wait, is she ready to go, right? Is she ready to go? Have I passed on all the wisdom to her that she needs to know for this next stage of her life? Okay, have I spoken everything to her that I need to make sure that I download to her? And then has she absorbed the things that I've already taught her? Okay, have I set the example? Is it part of who she is now? Okay, and then you begin to say things, and maybe I haven't said them yet, but I've thought them. The now remembers. You know what I'm talking about? Now remember, ... Okay, so now remember, you need to check your oil and check your tire pressure every so often, right? Or remember, you need to keep track of your spending. Make sure, you're not just using your debit card. Or remember, don't date someone until I've met him and given my approval, right? So those important things like that, okay? And then, of course, there are consequences, right? If you don't do these things, then this is what's going to happen. And so if I don't meet that guy and give my approval first, I'm going to hunt him down. All right, Emily, got it? So, yeah, hopefully so, right? This is how to think about the book of Deuteronomy. And I say that because here's Moses. And remember, Moses doesn't get to cross over into the promised land. And so here it is. They're on the precipice of this change. They're going into a new frontier. And if I was their leader up to that point in time, all of a sudden I'd want to be like, okay, you guys, remember, this is what you need to know, right? So in the book of Deuteronomy, you find that there's this reiteration of the law that God has given to Moses that he's passed on to them. And any leader is going to feel the weight of the responsibility of what they've been teaching to people. Because they want to make sure that they have not taught them in vain. Okay? And repetition actually is one of the ways to get it. It's one of the ways that we get it, okay? And I remember a leader of mine used to say, and he said it frequently, that's why I remember it, that the cost of knowledge is review, or repetition. The cost of knowledge is repetition. He's like, if you want to know something, and I was like, that's so simple, but it's so true. If you want to know something, repeat it. In Scouts with my son, we have the Scout law. You guys have probably heard it before. A Scout is trustworthy and loyal and helpful and friendly. And you know what? We repeat that thing every single week. Do you know why we do it? because we want them to get it. We want them to understand it and know that this is how a scout is, The Pledge of Allegiance. We all know it because we've repeated it so many times growing up. The Lord's Prayer, right? Almost every church has, sometimes where we repeat the Lord's Prayer. The words of your favorite song, your bank account number, well, I don't know mine, to be honest, but some people I'm sure have it memorized because you've repeated it. But it's things that are important to us. And so this is kind of what Moses is doing here. It's his final hurrah, and he wants to repeat the things that are important to God, that are important for his people to know. And he wants to make sure that they get it. So Deuteronomy is sort of a manual for their relationship with God as they go in. And it's an agreement between God and his people. And the interesting thing is, scholars have found that it actually follows the form of agreements from back in that day of the ancient Near East. There was a type of agreement called a suzerain vassal treaty. If you guys want to, I recommend that you Google it, look it up. I find it very fascinating. I'm not going to go into it right now. But I will just say that this form that God used to create this agreement, this covenant with his people, is very similar to the covenant and the agreement that happened between nations in that day. Okay? Pretty cool, huh? So, suzerain vassal treaty, if you want to look that up. Now, we don't think of laws and agreements and things like that to be very relationship-oriented, do we? That makes my eyes gloss over when I think of laws and contracts and lawyers and things like that. But this is a little bit different here. And, like Johnny. Johnny, it's not like I'm going to say to you, hey, will you be my friend? Here, sign this on this line. And let's agree to these things, right? So we don't naturally think that way. But I think of it in this way. This is a covenant, which is more of a relational commitment. So we can kind of understand this in terms of a marriage, right? Because in a marriage, we stand up before a group of people, witnesses, and we say certain commitments to one another. But it's a relational contract is really what it is, right? But it's more this love relationship. And that's how I see the book of Deuteronomy. I think that's the way that we need to think of it. It's rooted in the heart of God toward his people. So listen to this. Deuteronomy 7:7. The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. Okay, now the words that I want to pull out of there are two of them. One, chosen. I've chosen you. The other one is set his affection on you. Okay, those are kind of mushy-gushy words. Those are relational words, not typical contract words, all right? So the Lord created this love relationship. And I think it's not unlike the love relationship that he desires to have with us today. His heart is still, his affection is still toward his people. And God gave them clear boundaries on what that love relationship would and would not look like, especially before they marched into this new frontier. See, when they marched in there, it was going to be good because this is the land of promise. This is like what God had committed to them long ago to give them in this land. But we all know that when they went into that land as a holy people of God, that they were encountering not other holy people. That they were encountering unholy nations. That's why they had to have the boundaries set so that they would remain a holy nation. Have any of you ever felt like a holy person in a very unholy environment? Okay? I'm sure that all of us have. Whether that was with some other folks in our families, our extended families, or certain friends that used to be friends that maybe now aren't as close of friends anymore if you're living for Jesus, or, maybe it's, your workplace or environment or your school, whatever.